I had a student once ask me who my favorite author was, and I, told them a few of my favorite authors of all time. Then they asked what author I thought worked the hardest. I said Christopher Tolkien. They said, "Do you mean J.R.R. Tolkien?" I said, "No. Christopher Tolkien had the biggest responsibility in the literary world at the time to take all of his father, J.R.R. Tolkien's works, all of his notes, all of the incredible universe that he built, and then continued that on by finishing the Silmarillion, by finishing several other Book of the Lost Tales, things that J.R.R., his father, had put together and then carried on his legacy. That is an incredible undertaking. Christopher has never gotten the kind of praise that he should have for that particular work. Well, I didn't think that I would experience that kind of a thing again. And it's not something that you really enjoy seeing because you can tell the stress on an author who has to pick up after his father's legacy. We're honored to have one of those cases here today, and one that I have personal experience with. The son of Nelson DeMille, who passed away last year, author of the incredible Scott Brody, Maggie Taylor series, one of the best novelists that writes a book without getting in your face about how good of a writer he is. His son, Alex DeMille, is with us today, carrying on that legacy. The Tin Men, it's out in just a couple of days, October 28th. Alex, thanks for joining us, man. Hi,
Tony. Thanks for having me. That was quite an intro. I can't live up to Tolkien, but I really appreciate the comparison for sure.
People don't understand the importance of legacy building, but our society is searching for it right now. I can't tell you how many people in the last 6 months that I've talked to that the concept of the legacy, passing things on to your kids and then actually having your kids take up the mantle of your work has become such an important thing, almost in the way of, you ever get a tooth pulled or you lose a tooth and like your tongue just keeps running over that space where the tooth was because you didn't realize how important it was until it's gone. And I think that idea of passing on the legacy in this country has become that tooth that's missing. We always just assumed the father and son businesses and the mother and daughter businesses and enterprises, you might say, to actually take on the work of your parents and do it well is an incredible craft. How do you even begin to approach finishing your father's work and continuing on the series like this?
Well, it was before we even started, I knew working with him as a co-author would be daunting. I mean, the man, aside from being talented, he was a perfectionist. So he wasn't there, he wasn't the kind of guy who would actually just be like, I'll slap my name on it. And it doesn't matter what. So I knew that like, this was not just, I think maybe his publishers expected that if he had a co-author, he'd write twice as fast, and that's just not how he worked. They should have known that,
But people should know that anyway. I mean, if you've ever had the wonderful pleasure of helping, as I have, your dad rewire the electric stuff in his fishing boat, or you've helped your dad, fixing something around the house, that is not a faster process. And I've been told that as the one who wasn't holding the flashlight correctly. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So for me, it was like, yes, I'm not a replacement, nor do I have to kind of pretend like I don't exist, like I'm a ghostwriter. I have to be additive, So I didn't, until I knew or felt that I could do that. I honestly, I told him I was obviously flattered when he asked me to write with him, but I wasn't totally sure it was going to be the right thing for him or for me. And it wasn't until with the Deserter, he's like, why don't you, write a proposal, write a pitch for what this can be. All we had was male-female CID team hunting down a deserter somewhere in the world. So I worked on something, and I came up with something that I was really happy with. He was happy with, and that's when I realized, okay, I'm kind of starting. I'm at the genesis of what this particular series is, so I feel like I can take that and run with it. And it was a steep learning curve for sure.
Deserter came out in what, 19? something about that something about thereabouts?
That's right. Yeah. 19. That's
okay.
Right.
And then, but you guys had been writing together though. When was the first time I saw it on the cover? I want to say Bloodline, 2012-ish, or was it before that you guys started writing?
Bloodlines was after Deserter. So Deserter was the first one, and then Bloodlines was God, 2023. No, it was a long gap between them, because that was my pandemic book. And he was writing The Maze. He was writing The Maze at the same. Yeah, yes. He was writing The Maze at the same time I was writing Bloodlines. And it was, the world shut down. Suddenly nobody's in their offices. Nobody's checking on me. So I get to be indulgent and spend way too much time writing that book. But I think
it's going to bother me. Well. It's going to bother. I'm going to have to, I don't have those books on the shelf, because this is where more of if I have a bunch of novels on the shelf, people give me grief. So that, more of the political and history books. What was that? I might be confusing it with The Panther. There's just writing military stuff has always been an incredibly difficult undertaking, because you can do it cheesily. Kurt Schlichter and I talk about this quite often with his spy series. But nothing that you or your dad have ever put out was cheesy. And I say it personally, my personal favorite work is Nightfall. It's just really well done. I know that's not one. I don't think that you wrote with him on that one, but it's so excellent.
That's the earliest I ever had any collaboration with him, was Nightfall. And simply, I didn't do any of the writing, but he was in a bind with the ending, and I gave him his idea. I gave him the idea for how to end that book, which I won't spoil for anybody who hasn't read it. But I think that what that book ended up being about, and kind of the larger context of what was going on with the conspiracy or conspiracy theories around TWA Flight 800, and given the timeline of when he was writing that book, I said, what if you do this? And he made it work, but I gave him that idea. So I think he acknowledged me, and some people loved it, and they told him how brilliant he was. And then there's I was able to search on Amazon for like the word son under the review. So anybody who didn't like it was like, why do you listen to his stupid son about the ending for that book? So that was my first encounter with Amazon reviewers.
It's really funny you say that.
You get none of the credit and all the blame, depending on how people feel about things.
There's I think there's a King of the Hill end of the show where Hank Hill had been talking about plumbing the entire episode. It was something to do with the house's toilet. And it's like he does a little end of show after school special PSA. He drives his mower up to the camera and goes, "Now, folks, we've talked a lot today about plumbing. And if you ever call a plumber, it's a father and son business. Ask for the father." And I guess that it really is true. Some of those, blaming service on the son that you don't like, that really does transcend across different industries.
Great impression, by the way. That
brought me
back. That's a great show.
This is supposed to be a network style interview, but sometimes when I have more of a personal connection to what's being talked about, I'm just going to level with you guys as the audience. We do not normally link series of books in the description. Of course, we're going to link The Tin Men. You should definitely go check it out. It's coming out in a few days. I'm just going to read the Amazon little excerpt here. At a top secret Army training facility in the Mojave Desert, special agents Scott Brody and Maggie Taylor plunge into a deadly web of military intrigue, AI technology, and robot soldiers as they unravel the shocking murder of a senior scientist in this gripping thriller. And it is. Every one of these is just stellar. And of course, we'll link that. But we're going to link the entire series of works that Alex and Nelson have put together over their time. So few are able to pull off a co-authorship in a series as well as you guys have. And I'm not just trying to flatter you here. I think that this focal point of not just pumping out cheap AI written thrillers, or some military thrillers or spy thrillers have become so obsessed with the minutia of this is the one criticism I had of James Wesley Rawls' books, and he's a friend. He knows I make this criticism, but it's too technical. It's almost like it's a shopping list of military and survival equipment instead of a story with driven characters. You guys put character development in a military thriller or a spy thriller or a conspiracy thriller in ways that so many don't focus on the characters themselves. And I'm really impressed with that. Sorry, I know that's not a question, but I don't know, maybe just an accolade.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my dad's, that was always his chief value, is a character first. He said, mediocre writers hide behind plot. Like it's not that it's easy to plot, but you could make a extremely complex plot where you never know what's happening, and you have 2-page long chapters, and there's like 5,000 of them, and you kind of string.
Well, you talked about that already with one of the earlier books. You talked about having the plot And that not being enough for the book itself, that you and your dad actually had to flesh out the characters and the setting and how you would actually carry out this really cool story. I think that's very well put.
And having good characters that feel fleshed out actually makes the writing for me easier, because you will get stuck. You will not quite know what happens next. And if these characters are real for you and for the reader, they sometimes will tell you. They might. I've had. I mean, it sounds hokey, but I have had characters surprise me as I'm writing them. They'll say something and I'm like, oh, wow. And that will take me off on some other direction, you know?
That's not hokey at all. And I want to pull to kind of a reference here. George Lucas often talked about the easiest characters to write in the original trilogy was when, Alec Guinness would come back as Ben Kenobi and talk to Luke. And the reason he said that is it's so much easier to portray a character after they're gone, speaking to someone else kind of from the outside in, because their actions and their motives are already pre-established. And he said that he got that from the concept of a child with their imaginary friend. He said, try to tell a child that something about their imaginary friend, that one of the first things that people learn how to do is draw concepts of characters so that they can relate them in stories, because that's such an inherent thing to our human psyche, that if you try to tell a child that, their imaginary friend who's purple is actually blue, the child will get very upset, because the character does, as you kind of alluded to here, they almost write themselves. We are deeply connected to the formation of characters that are believable. I mean, some say it's to solve problems, some say it's to pass on, historical stories. Maybe that's why when you finish a really good book or movie, you feel like you're at a loss because you don't get any more of that character.
I think that's a really good point. That's absolutely true, because it is something that we all, whether it's anybody who's, I'm going to meet somebody and I'm imagining how it's going to play out. I'm going on a date. I'm having a job interview, or we all do it. Right. So it is interesting. And it's interesting to do it when you're doing it, when you're creating the person. You're not just using that as kind of like a psychological construct, but it has the same association as when you do that in your normal life.
Now, I do have to pivot. I know we've gone kind of over time. I don't care. We've talked a little bit about, of course, the series at hand. Obviously, writing with your father, that was an incredible feat that spanned 16, 17 years, about almost, maybe 15 around. You've been writing with your father for a long time, of course, after suffering a stroke, I believe. And then, of course, his passing.
He had complications, which it turned out to be, he had esophageal cancer, but there was complications that we didn't quite know were from that started. So importantly, he didn't have any sort of mental decline. So it was more of he was dealing with a lot of physical ailments in the last year of his life.
Got you. Thanks for that correction. That's why I paused. I didn't want to, go off on, alluding to things that weren't quite correct there. This book, The Tin Men, is the last book in this novel series that he had a lot of input on, that, again, kind of a capstone of your time writing with your father. And again, why I started the interview talking about the incredible feat of finishing J.R.R.'s work, capping off the Silmarillion as Christopher did. He had to finish some of those works without his father seeing it across the finish line with him. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you through anything. I'm not trying to evoke any emotion here as the guy interviewing you. Can you give me a little bit of insight, what you're feeling carrying this book across the finish line at all? And if it's not appropriate, feel free to say no comment or something like that.
No, I mean, it was so intense and so real. I'm happy to talk about that. I only started writing this book because he got ill. He was supposed to be writing his own book. So we kind of shuffled the entire thing. So I started this book knowing, kind of under this cloud of knowing he might not be around for the end of it. And at some point, I was sending him chapters as I did for the last two books, and he was reading them when he could, but it just, the time between me sending him stuff and him replying became longer and longer. And, I feel good today. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. And there just came a time where I sent him a chapter and he never read it. And I just kept working on the book, knowing he probably wouldn't read anything I wrote from that moment on. And that was hard. But And then he died, and it was different. Obviously, it was a different feeling. But what happened then is I kind of gave myself license. I'm like, I'm not waiting for this man to email me back anymore. I no longer have that kind of expectation. So instead, what I'm pulling on is all these memories of him. I mean, as a father and also as a collaborator. And just the way my characters talk to me, he was talking to me, and I got his notes. They weren't exactly the notes I would have gotten from him if he were alive, but they were. There's something there, I was doing this other level of editorial on myself that I never did before, because I knew that there was this other reader and this other person whose name was on the book, and I absorbed, his point of view, his humor, his what he finds interesting, what he finds thrilling. And all of that kind of wrapped in. And sometimes I knew there was things I was writing that he wouldn't write, which happened on the previous books too. And sometimes there was pushback from him, and sometimes I would push back on his pushback, and all these things. I mean, you could say I was going a little schizo. I was alone in a house upstate finishing this book. But I was as much as one could in a non-spiritual way commune with the memory of their parent. I was doing it.
I will gladly push back on the almost the implication that it's a hokey kind of pseudo spiritual, that just should be, kind of brushed off to the side. One of the most important facets of an individual's written work is that it immortalizes the personality and the experiences and the skills and the efforts that they clearly produced. And so, no, it's not, I reject the idea that someone should look at that and go, oh, come on now. No, it's very, very, very real. And if you've ever offered up your work for the criticism of a parent, just a small sidebar here, my grandmother in Henry County watches every single show, and she'll see things that often others won't see. And I have thought a little bit about the time in which those messages won't be coming in. And it's a different kind of feeling. But that out of the way, to mention, you were actually leading me right to the final kind of content question I wanted to ask here. Were there any moments in the book that, as you said before, maybe you and your dad would disagree on, would say, maybe we go this way, no, actually, maybe go this other way, and maybe you won out prior, where when writing The Tin Men, you looked at this and said, maybe I would go this way, but I know that he would want it this way, so I'm going to go that way instead for the third book of this particular series?
It's not so much a binary of this way or that way, but there were certain things that he was incredibly good at that I'd like to think I've gotten good at.
Flavor in the way that Nelson often would. Yeah.
There's some, there's a lot of these books, they have humor to them, but there's a lot there. The subject matter themselves is pretty dark. And there was times when I'm like, we need, not just because we need to entertain the reader, we need some lightness here, because that's what he always said. People, I was in Vietnam, I was being shot at, and we were still making jokes. That's how people are. So I would have to force myself to find some of the funnier moments. And when it came to also the action, he was an incredible writer of action. And that was also because of, it's different than a screenplay, the level of detail and the pacing. It's just an entirely different,
what the mind latches
skill
onto when it's reading it. I mean, yeah, that's a huge thing. And you're completely right about the moments of levity. Completely right about the moments of levity in a deep and intense moment as well. That's what keeps people from cracking. That's really, really cool.
So I was, for the action scenes, I'm like, I need to achieve, I don't have a safety net here. I have to achieve the level of craft that I did with him. And now I'm doing it without him, but I'm basically digging in deeper, because then I have to, realize like I've learned, you learn a lot about yourself and somebody else writing 2 like 600-page books with them. So I'd say I pulled on that, and some of the things I maybe wouldn't have taken on alone, I kind of forced myself to do instead of simply writing to my own strengths.
At what moment doing that in The Tin Men did you realize you'd kind of assumed a little bit of the mantle of the active writing perfectionist that your father was?
The funny thing is that's because of just the publishing schedule, and because he had died and we were dealing with all of that, I did not have nearly as much time to finish this book. So I was writing quickly without sacrificing the standard. So I was being I was having to be, and that frankly, that's how he wrote anyway. I mean, I'm honoring my father by doing so much of this, burning the candle at both ends kind of thing. That's how he would write his books too. So I was having to have that same level of care and perfectionism while also having so little time. And it gives you the sense of the high stakes and the tension of the book a little bit. I'd like to think so. I did feel like I'm in his headspace fully by the end of this book.
Alex DeMille, co-author with his father, Nelson DeMille, on this last of the 3-book series for the Scott Brody and Maggie Taylor series. It's a good series. Just to be honest with you, I'd recommend it. And that comes out on the 28th, The Tin Men. Thank you very much. I know this has been a little unorthodox, maybe in the style of the interview, but I really appreciate your opening up on some of these questions. And again, we have on literary people from time to time. Spencer Klavin's joined us to talk about the revivification of the American novel and those who are deeply invested in these kind of works. And I'm thrilled to see how you carry out this last in the series. And thank you very much for the work that you've done with your dad over the years. We miss Nelson greatly. But if I can say so, just as someone who's read a lot of these books, you're doing an excellent credit to his legacy.
Thank you, Tony. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate your words. Thank you.